Captain Maya Torres stood on the bridge of her ship watching the strange world grow larger on the main screen. The planet looked like nothing she had ever seen before. Massive trees reached up through the clouds and floating cities drifted around them like glowing jewels. The trees were so tall they seemed to pierce the sky itself, and their bark shimmered with colors that had no names. Maya had been chosen to lead humanity's first contact mission to this mysterious place called Nithara. The beings who lived here called themselves Etherians, and their messages to Earth had been unlike anything humans had received before. The transmissions came not as radio waves, but as something that touched the mind directly, leaving behind images and feelings rather than words. Her crew of 30 specialists prepared for the most important moment in human history. They had trained for years learning everything they could about alien contact protocols, but nothing could have prepared them for what they saw when they entered orbit around Nithara. The cities floated without any visible support systems, and beings with tall, graceful forms moved through the air as easily as walking. The Etherians had skin that seemed to glow from within, and their movements were fluid. Like dancers, Maya wore her best dress uniform as she prepared to beam down to the surface with her diplomatic team. Commander Lisa Park stood beside her, checking their equipment one final time. The translator devices might not work with beings who spoke with their minds, but they carried them anyway, along with gifts from Earth and recording devices to document this historic moment. The beam-down location was a massive platform carved from what looked like crystal, but felt warm to the touch. As soon as Maya and her team materialized, they could feel the difference in this place. The air itself seemed alive with energy that made their skin tingle, and their thoughts feel sharper somehow. In the distance, they could see the great palace where Queen Lyrelei waited to meet them. The palace was not built but grown from a living mountain that pulsed with soft light. Stairs wound up its surface, leading to an entrance that was both beautiful and terrifying. The doorway was large enough for ships to pass through, and it seemed to breathe like a great sleeping beast. As they climbed the steps, Maya felt eyes watching them, though she could see no one. Inside the palace, the walls were covered with patterns that shifted and moved, telling stories Maya could almost understand. The ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into darkness, and the floor beneath their feet was smooth as glass but warm like skin. They walked through halls that seemed to go on forever, until finally they reached the throne room. The throne room was vast beyond imagination, carved from the heart of the living mountain itself. Strange lights danced along the walls, and the air hummed with power that made Maya's teeth ache. Queen Lyrelei sat on a throne that looked like it had grown from the floor itself. Her form was tall and elegant, with skin that glowed like moonlight, and eyes that held the depth of stars. Beside the throne lay the most terrifying creature Maya had ever seen, a dragon the size of a building with scales that looked like black crystal and eyes like burning coals. Its breath came out in wisps of steam, and when it shifted its position, the entire room trembled. The beast watched them with intelligence that was both ancient and alien. Maya stepped forward with her diplomatic team flanking her. She had practiced her opening speech 100 times and knew exactly what to say. But before she could speak, Queen Lyrelei raised her hand, and suddenly, Maya could hear a voice inside her head speaking words that chilled her blood. The queen spoke without moving her lips, and her voice echoed inside Maya's mind like thunder. "Welcome, humans, to my world. I am Lyrelei, last of my kind and keeper of sorrows. You come seeking friendship and trade, but you do not understand what you ask." The dragon beside her throne lifted its massive head and stared directly at Maya's team, with eyes that seemed to look through their souls. Maya tried to respond but found her voice caught in her throat. There was something about this place and these beings that was far beyond anything humans had imagined. The queen was beautiful, but there was a sadness in her that was deeper than oceans and older than mountains. The dragon radiated power that made the air itself tremble. Without warning, the dragon rose to its feet and opened its mouth. A jet of flame so hot it turned the air white shot across the throne room. Maya watched in horror as her entire diplomatic team simply vanished, leaving only shadows burned into the crystal floor. She stood alone, facing beings whose power she could not comprehend, while the smell of burned air filled her nostrils. "Only you may approach me," Human warned Queen Lyrelei, and Her voice in Maya's head carried weight like falling mountains. Your companions carried something in their hearts that my guardian could not tolerate, but you are different. Step forward if you have courage or flee. If you value your life above truth. Maya looked at the place where her team had been standing just moments before. These were people she had known for years, trained with, worked beside, and now they were gone, without even time to scream. She should have been terrified, should have run back to her ship and called for help. But something in the Queen's voice held her in place. She took a step forward, then another. The dragon watched her every movement but did not attack. The Queen smiled, and it was like sunrise after endless night. There is hope in you, human, something I have not felt in centuries. Come closer and let us see if your species is worthy of what I must share. Maya walked across the vast throne room, feeling smaller with each step, but also somehow braver. The patterns on the walls seemed to shift and change, showing her glimpses of things she did not understand. Battles in space between beings of light and creatures of shadow worlds burning, and heroes falling. But through it all, she kept walking toward the throne, when she finally stood before Queen Lyrelei, close enough to see the strange marks along her arms that pulsed with inner light. Maya realized this meeting would change everything. The Queen reached out one graceful hand and touched Maya's forehead, and suddenly the human woman could see images flooding her mind. She saw Nithara as it once was, filled with millions of Etherians, living in harmony with nature and each other. She saw great ships sailing between stars and peaceful meetings with dozens of different species. She saw a golden age of cooperation and learning that lasted for thousands of years. But then came the darkness. The images changed, and Maya saw something that made her soul freeze with terror, a creeping blackness that moved between stars, consuming everything in its path. Entire worlds went silent as something unspeakable spread across the galaxy, feeding on life itself. The Etherians fought back, but even their incredible powers were not enough. Queen Lyrelei pulled her hand away, and Maya staggered backward, gasping for air. The visions faded, but their memory burned in her mind like brands. What you have seen, human, is why I am alone, why my people are gone, and why you must listen very carefully to what I tell. You, the Queen, stood from her throne, and Maya could see she was even taller than she had appeared sitting down. Your species is young, and knows nothing of the true dangers that wait in the dark between stars. But you have something we thought was lost forever, something that may be the key to survival itself. The dragon moved closer, and Maya could feel its breath on her skin, hot as summer wind, but somehow not unpleasant. You alone may approach me because you alone carry the mark of the ancient ones buried deep in your genetic code. The Queen walked down from her throne and circled Maya like a predator studying prey, but her movements held no threat, only curiosity. Your people do not know it, but they are the children of those who came before the inheritors of a legacy thought extinct. Maya found her voice at last, though it came out smaller than she intended. What do you mean? What legacy? What mark? The Queen smiled again, and this time there was something that might have been relief in her expression. Patience, human. There is much to learn and little time to learn it. The enemy that destroyed my people is coming, and your species stands directly in its path. But perhaps together, we can do what neither could accomplish alone. Perhaps there is still hope for both our kinds. The dragon lowered its great head until it was level with Maya, and she found herself staring into eyes older than human civilization. In those depths, she saw not the mindless beast she had expected, but intelligence, vast and ancient and unutterably sad. This creature had seen the rise and fall of empires, had watched stars being born and die, and had somehow survived when all else had perished. Maya reached out slowly and touched the dragon's snout. The scales were warm and smooth like polished stone, and she could feel a heartbeat strong as earthquakes thrumming beneath her palm. The beast closed its eyes, and for a moment she felt a connection to something larger than herself, larger than her entire species. When she opened her eyes again, Queen Lyrelei was watching her with an expression of wonder. Your people may yet surprise us, human. Perhaps there is more hope than I dared believe. Come, we have much to discuss, and time grows short with each passing day. Maya followed the queen deeper into the palace, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. Behind them, the dragon padded silently, its footsteps making no sound despite its massive size. She had come here as a diplomat, but she was beginning to understand she might need to become something else entirely, something her species had never seen before. The corridors they walked through were filled with treasures beyond imagination, but Queen Lyrelay stood and walked to a wall covered in shifting patterns that seemed to move like living things. Maya watched as the queen placed her hand against the crystal surface, and suddenly the entire wall became transparent, showing the vast space beyond. Nythera stars stretched out in every direction, but many of them were dark, as if something had snuffed out their light like candles. Your species believes you are alone in a universe full of empty worlds, but you are wrong, Queen Lyrelay, said her voice still speaking directly into Maya's mind. Once this galaxy teemed with life. Hundreds of species built great civilizations and worked together in harmony for thousands of years. The dragon Vorthak opened one massive eye and watched. As the queen spoke, Maya could see sadness in every line of the queen's graceful form. There was something broken about her despite her incredible beauty and power. The marks on her arms pulsed with a soft light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and Maya realized they were not decorations but scars that had been transformed into something else. My people, the Etherians, were among the oldest races in this part of the galaxy. Queen Lyrelay continued. We had mastered sciences your people have not even dreamed of. We could speak across vast distances with our minds, travel between stars without ships, and shape matter with our will. But for all our power, we were peaceful. We sought knowledge and beauty and harmony with all living things. The transparent wall began showing images that moved like memories. Maya saw beautiful beings with glowing skin, living in cities that floated among the clouds. She saw great gatherings where dozens of different alien species came. Together in friendship, she saw wonders that took her breath away. Gardens that grew in space itself, art that changed based on who looked at it, music that could heal wounds with its sound. But then something changed. The images on the wall grew darker, and Maya felt her heart begin to race with fear. She saw the same peaceful worlds she had just admired, but now they were different. The cities were empty, the gardens withered, and a creeping darkness seemed to spread across everything like an infection. First noticed it when the transmissions from the outer colonies stopped coming, Queen Lyrelay said, and her mental voice carried pain that made Maya want to weep. Ships were sent to investigate, but they never returned. Then worlds closer to the galactic center began going silent one by one. Something was moving through space, consuming everything in its path. Maya watched in horror as the images showed entire star systems being devoured by writhing black tendrils that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. The tendrils wrapped around planets and stars alike, draining them of something essential until they became hollow shells that crumbled to dust. We called it the Void Swarm. Queen Lyrelay said, though that name cannot capture the true horror of what it is. It is not a species as you would understand the term. It is hunger, given form, destruction made manifest. It feeds on life itself, but not just the physical bodies of living beings. It consumes souls' memories, the very essence that makes each creature unique. The dragon Vorthak raised his great head, and Maya could see ancient pain in those burning eyes. She realized this creature had lived through the horrors being described, had seen his entire civilization swept away by something beyond imagination. The scars along Queen Lyrelay's arms pulsed brighter as if responding to the dragon's movement. Maya found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. How did you survive? How are you still here when everything else was destroyed? Queen Lyrelay turned away from the wall, and Maya could see tears running down her luminous cheeks like liquid starlight. My people made a choice. When we realized we could not defeat the Void Swarm through conventional warfare, we decided to make the ultimate sacrifice. Every living Etherian on every world throughout our empire volunteered to give up their individual existence to create something that might stop the enemy. The queen walked over to Vorthak and placed her hand on the dragon's massive head. Maya could see the love between them, but also an impossible weight of grief and responsibility. They merged their life forces with Vorthak's using ancient techniques that bound their souls to his body. The energy created by this sacrifice was used to create a barrier around this world, one so powerful that nothing can penetrate it. Maya began to understand the true horror of what she was hearing. So you are alone. Not just the last of your species on this world, but the last Etherian anywhere in the universe. And Vorthak carries the souls of everyone you ever knew, everyone you ever loved. The queen nodded, and fresh tears fell from her eyes. I am the keeper of their memories, the guardian of their sacrifice. I chose to remain separate, so that someone would remember what was lost and why. But the burden is almost too much to bear. Sometimes I can hear their voices calling to me from within Vorthak, begging me to join them in the peace of unity. Maya looked at the dragon with new understanding. This creature was not just a pet or guardian, but a living tomb containing an entire civilization. She could not imagine the weight of such responsibility or the loneliness of being the only one left to carry it. But why am I different? Maya asked. Why could my team not approach you but I can? What makes me special in a way that saved my life? Queen Lyrelay smiled for the first time since they had met, and there was something like hope in her expression. You carry something in your genetic code that we thought was lost forever. When the Void Swarm first began its campaign of destruction, there was another species that tried to fight back. They were called the Ancients, and they were even older than my people. Maya listened with growing amazement as Queen Lyrelay explained how the Ancients had been the first to recognize the true threat of the Void Swarm. They had developed defenses against the creatures, psychic attacks, and fought a desperate war to protect the younger species, but in the end even they were overwhelmed. Before they fell, the Ancients scattered genetic markers throughout the galaxy, hoping that someday new species would evolve that carried their resistance to the Void Swarm. Your people are descendants of one of the worlds they seeded. The markers have been dormant in human DNA for millions of years, but they are still there. Still functional. Maya felt her world shift again as she realized the implications. You are saying that humans are not just random evolution. We were created, or at least guided by this ancient species as weapons against the Void Swarm, not weapons. Queen Lyrelay corrected Hope. But you do carry within you the one thing that can resist. The swarm's influence. Your people cannot be transformed into mindless drones like so many others. The genetic markers make you immune to their psychic control. Vorthak lifted his head and looked directly at Maya with those ancient eyes. She could feel something stirring in her mind, like memories that were not her own. Images flashed through her consciousness of great battles fought between stars of heroes, making impossible sacrifices of last stands against overwhelming darkness. The dragon is sharing with you, Queen Lyrelay said, and her voice was filled with wonder. He has never done that with anyone except me. You truly do carry the mark of the Ancients, stronger than we dared hope. Perhaps there is a chance after all. Maya gasped as the visions continued. She saw fleets of ships unlike anything humans had built, weapons that could crack planets, defenses that turned space itself into a barrier against attack. But she also saw them failing, saw the Ancients making their final, desperate gambit to preserve some hope for the future. When the visions faded, Maya found herself changed somehow. The knowledge was still there in her mind, like a library she could access but did not fully understand. She looked at Queen Lyrelay and Vorthak with new eyes, seeing not just powerful aliens, but the last guardians of civilizations beyond count. How long do we have? Maya asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Queen Lyrelay returned to the transparent wall and touched it again. The view changed, showing the dark regions of space where stars had gone silent. The darkness was closer now, much closer than it had been in the earlier images. Like a cancer spreading through the galaxy, consuming light and life wherever it touched, the Void Swarm moved slowly but inevitably. Queen Lyrelay said, "It has already consumed 3/4 of this galaxy and is moving toward the region where your people live. Based on its previous patterns, I estimate you have perhaps 50 years before the first scouts reach your outer colonies." Maya felt her heart sink. 50 years seemed like a long time. But she had seen what this enemy could do. How could humanity possibly prepare for something that had defeated civilizations far more advanced than their own? Even with the genetic advantages Queen Lyrelei had described, they were still primitives compared to the ancients or Etherians. But we can help you, Queen Lyrelei said, as if reading her thoughts. Vorthak carries within him not just souls but knowledge, the combined wisdom of every Etherian who ever lived, their sciences, their technologies, their understanding of how to fight the swarm. All of it is preserved in his memory, waiting to be shared. The dragon made a sound deep in his chest like distant thunder, and Maya could feel the power contained within that massive form. It was not just physical strength, but the accumulated knowledge of an entire interstellar civilization. Everything they had learned about warfare science, and the art of survival against impossible odds. But there is a price, Queen Lyrelei continued, and her expression grew serious. The knowledge cannot simply be downloaded into human minds like data your brains are. Maya woke in a chamber carved from living crystal that pulsed with soft light matching her heartbeat. She had been on Nithara for 3 weeks now, and each day brought new wonders and terrors as Queen Lyrelei shared the knowledge needed to prepare humanity for the coming war. But today would be different. Today, she would make contact with Vorthak himself. The great dragon had watched her throughout her training, but had never allowed her to come close. The ancient creature seemed to tolerate her presence, but showed no sign of the acceptance she would need to access the memories locked within his massive form. Queen Lyrelei had warned her that forcing the connection could drive her mad or worse. But time was running short. Reports from human space had begun arriving through the communication array Queen Lyrelei had helped her establish. 3 outer colonies had gone silent in the past month, their final transmissions speaking of stars growing dim and shadows moving between worlds. The Void Swarm had found humanity, and its scouts were already beginning their work. Maya, dressed in the simple robes that had been provided for her, made from a material that felt like silk but shimmered with its own inner light. The weeks of training had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Her reflexes were faster, her mind clearer, and sometimes she could sense things that should have been beyond human perception. She made her way through the corridors of the palace that had become familiar to her over the past weeks. The walls still shifted with their living patterns, but now she could almost understand what they were trying to say. Stories of ancient battles, heroes, and sacrifices told in a language that bypassed words entirely. The great throne room Vorthak lay coiled around the base of Queen Lyrelei's throne, his massive head resting on his forearms. The dragon was even larger than Maya had first realized, easily the size of a human city block and covered in scales that looked like black diamonds. Each scale was perfectly formed and seemed to contain depths that went on forever. Queen Lyrelei stood beside her companion, running her hands along his neck in a gesture that spoke of centuries of friendship and shared sorrow. Today, Maya would attempt to form a connection with the creature that held the memories of an entire civilization within his mind. The process cannot be forced. The Queen had explained Vorthak must choose to share his memories with you. If he senses any fear or doubt in your heart, he will reject the connection. It is not cruelty but necessity. The knowledge he carries could destroy an unprepared mind. Maya approached the great dragon slowly, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. Vorthak's eyes opened as she drew near, and she found herself staring into depths that held the weight of eternity. The intelligence she saw there was vast and ancient and utterly alien, yet there was also something familiar about it. She knelt before the dragon and placed her hands on the smooth scales of his snout. The contact was electric, sending jolts of sensation up her arms and into her mind. For a moment nothing happened, and Maya feared the dragon would reject her, as he had so many times before. But then something shifted. Images began flooding into Maya's consciousness, not gentle like the visions Queen Lyrelei had shared, but overwhelming, like being caught in an avalanche of memory. She saw through Vorthak's eyes as he soared above Etherian cities in their golden age, when millions of his people lived in harmony with nature and each other. The beauty was breathtaking. Cities that floated like jewels in the sky, connected by bridges of solidified light, gardens that stretched across continents where every plant and tree grew in perfect harmony, art that changed and evolved as you watched it, music that could heal wounds and bring the dead back to life. Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she experienced the sheer wonder of what had been lost, but the visions were just beginning. She saw Vorthak as a young dragon bonding with his first Etherian partner, a warrior named Kelthris, who had been brave and noble and utterly devoted to protecting his people. Through Vorthak's memories, Maya experienced the gradual realization that something was wrong. The first signs were subtle colonies that stopped responding to communication ships that never returned from routine missions, trading partners who simply vanished, without explanation. Then came the first confirmed sighting of the Void Swarm, and Maya nearly screamed as she experienced Vorthak's terror and rage at seeing his worst nightmares made real creatures that were holes in reality itself, consuming everything. They touched turning vibrant worlds into empty husks that crumbled to dust. She watched through the dragon's eyes as the Etherians mobilized for war fleets of crystal ships that could travel faster than light weapons, that could crack moon's barriers, that turned space itself into a weapon against the invaders, but none of it was enough. The swarm adapted to every tactic learned from every defeat and grew stronger. Maya saw battle after battle, each one a desperate attempt to slow the enemy's advance. She witnessed acts of heroism that brought her to her knees and sacrifices that made her weep. She saw Kelthris and thousands of others die protecting worlds that would be consumed anyway, fighting enemies that could not be killed. The memories grew. Darker as the war progressed, Maya experienced Vorthak's anguish as world after world fell to the swarm. She felt his rage at being unable to save his people despite all his power and ancient wisdom. The dragon had been forced to watch his entire civilization crumble while he remained powerless to stop it. Then came the final battle, the last desperate gambit to create something that might survive the swarm's advance. Maya watched as millions of Etherians made the choice to merge their souls, with Vorthak transforming him from a single creature into a living repository of their entire civilization. The process was agonizing. Maya felt every soul as it merged with the dragon, adding its memories, knowledge, and essence to the growing collective. Within his mind, she experienced Vorthak's transformation from an individual being into something far greater and more terrible than he had ever wanted to become. When the merger was complete, Vorthak had become a living library containing the accumulated wisdom of an entire interstellar civilization. Every scientific discovery, every piece of military knowledge, every technique for survival against impossible odds, all of it was preserved within his consciousness. But the price had been enormous. Maya felt the dragon's loneliness as he realized he was no longer truly an individual. The voices of millions whispered in his mind, offering advice, sharing memories, contributing to every decision he made. He was never alone, but he was also never truly himself. Through the memories, Maya began to understand the full scope of what humanity was facing. The Void Swarm was not just an enemy that could be fought with conventional weapons. It existed partially outside normal space and time, making it nearly impossible to predict or counter. Its creatures could phase in and out of reality at will, making them almost invulnerable. But the merged consciousness within Vorthak had developed strategies. Maya saw techniques for fighting enemies that could not be touched directly, ways of predicting the swarm's movements based on subtle changes in space-time, methods for creating weapons that could harm creatures existing in multiple dimensions. The knowledge was vast and complex, requiring understanding of sciences humanity had not even begun to explore. But it was also practical, born from desperate necessity and tested in the crucible of the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen. Every technique had been proven in battle, every strategy paid for in blood. As the visions continued, Maya realized she was being changed by the experience. The constant flow of alien memories and knowledge was rewiring her brain, creating new pathways and connections. Her human consciousness was expanding to accommodate concepts that her species had never encountered. She saw through Vorthak's eyes as Queen Lyrelai made her choice to remain separate from the collective, to be the one who remembered what had been lost and carried the burden of the survivors' guilt. The Queen had sacrificed her chance at peace to ensure that someone would be left to tell the story. The dragon memories showed Maya the long centuries that followed as Nithara was sealed away from the rest of the galaxy. Queen Lyrelai and Vorthak had waited in isolation, hoping against hope that someday someone would come who could continue the fight. The loneliness had been crushing, but they had endured. Maya saw herself through Vorthak's perception when she first arrived on Nithara. The dragon had recognized the genetic markers immediately, had seen the potential that lay dormant in her human DNA. But he had also seen how unprepared she was for the responsibility that would soon be placed on her shoulders. The memories began to focus on military knowledge, and Maya found herself learning techniques for combat that no human had ever imagined. She learned to sense the swarm's presence across vast distances, to predict their attack patterns, to fight enemies that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Each lesson was seared into her consciousness through the experience of those who had used these techniques in actual combat. Maya felt herself wielding weapons of crystallized energy, learned to pilot ships that moved through folded space, experienced battles, fought in the void between stars, but with the knowledge came responsibility. Maya realized that every technique, every strategy, every piece of wisdom came with a price. The Etherians who had developed these methods had died using them. Their sacrifice was what made the knowledge possible, and that sacrifice could not be wasted as the memory transfer continued. Maya felt herself. The emergency signal reached Maya while she was deep in meditation, trying to integrate the latest batch of memories Vorthak had shared with her. 2 months had passed since her first connection with the great dragon, and the changes in her were becoming impossible to ignore. Her eyes now held flecks of silver that seemed to shine with their own light, and her movements carried a fluid grace that was distinctly non-human. Commander Lisa Park appeared on the communication screen, her face grim with barely controlled panic. "Maya, we have a situation. The outer colonies are gone. Not just silent, gone. The entire Kepler system has been dark for 3 days, and long-range scans show nothing where the planets used to be." Maya felt her transformed consciousness reach out across space, touching the edges of the darkness that was spreading through human territory. She could sense the void swarm now, like a cancer eating away at reality itself. The scouts had become a full invasion force, and humanity had no idea what they were facing. How many people, Maya asked, though she already knew the answer from the way Lisa's shoulders slumped. 12 million people across 4 colonies. Lisa said, her voice breaking. Just gone, as if they never existed. The last transmission we received was garbled something about the stars going out and shadows moving between worlds. Then nothing. Maya closed her eyes and let her expanded awareness stretch further. She could feel the swarm's presence like ice water in her veins, but she could also sense something else. The genetic markers in human DNA that Queen Lyrale had told her about. They were activating, responding to the presence of the ancient enemy. "Not everyone is gone," Maya said, opening her eyes to look at her old friend. "Some escaped. I can feel them scattered through space in emergency pods and damaged ships. The swarm does not consume everything at once. It tests, first learns the weaknesses of each species before committing to full assault." Lisa leaned forward, hope flickering in her expression. "Can we save them? Can we mount a rescue mission?" Maya looked past the communication screen to where Queen Lyrale and Vorthak waited. The alien queen had grown pale over the past weeks, as if the approaching war was draining her strength. The dragon watched everything with those ancient eyes that had seen too much already. "We can try," Maya said. "But first I need to speak with Admiral Sullivan. The fleet needs to know what they are really facing. The weapons and tactics that work against human enemies will be useless against the swarm." The connection switched to show Admiral Kate Sullivan, a woman Maya had known since her academy days. Kate looked older than her years, stress lines marking her face, and her uniform rumpled from too many sleepless nights. The weight of defending humanity had fallen on her shoulders, and it was crushing her. "Maya, thank God you are alive," Kate said, relief evident in her voice. "We need you back here. The military leadership is in chaos. Half of them want to evacuate Earth, and the other half want to launch a full-scale assault on whatever destroyed the colonies. Neither will work." Maya said, her voice carrying new authority, backed by the wisdom of civilizations. "You cannot evacuate from something that can consume entire star systems, and conventional weapons cannot harm enemies that exist partially outside normal space. We need a completely different approach." Kate frowned. "Maya, what happened to you over there?" You sound different, look different. What did those aliens do to you? Maya glanced at Queen Lyralee, who nodded encouragingly. They saved my life and possibly the life of every human in the galaxy. Kate, what I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but you have to listen. The enemy we face has already destroyed dozens of civilizations across the galaxy. Humanity is not the first, and unless we adapt quickly, we will not be the last. Over the next hour, Maya explained everything. The history of the Void, the fall of the Etherians, the genetic heritage that connected humans to the legendary ancients. Kate listened with growing horror as the true scope of the threat became clear. You are telling me we are facing an enemy that has been consuming the galaxy for millennia, Kate said when Maya finished. An enemy that our weapons cannot touch and our ships cannot outrun. Maya nodded. But there is hope. The knowledge of how to fight them still exists. Locked in Vorthak's memory, I have been learning their techniques, but I cannot teach an entire fleet in the time we have available. We need volunteers. People willing to undergo the same transformation I have experienced. The idea of volunteers becoming something more than human sparked immediate debate within the military hierarchy. Some commanders were horrified at the idea of changing their soldiers into alien hybrids. Others argued that any advantage was worth the risk. Admiral Sullivan found herself caught in the middle, trying to balance desperate necessity against military tradition. While the humans argued among themselves, the Void Swarm continued its advance. 3 more star systems went dark, and refugee ships began arriving at the outer defense stations. Their stories were consistent, and terrifying darkness falling across entire worlds, creatures that moved like liquid shadow weapons that simply passed through the enemy without effect. Maya felt each new loss like a physical blow. The expanded awareness that came with her transformation meant she could sense the death of entire populations, feel the moment when living worlds became empty husks. The weight of so much suffering threatened to crush her. But Vorthak's memories provided strength from those who had endured even greater losses. Queen Lyralee grew weaker each day, the effort of maintaining Nethera's protective barriers, while also helping Maya with her training. Taking its toll, the alien queen had lived for millennia, sustained by duty and the hope that someday someone would carry on the fight. But now that hope was becoming reality and the cost was becoming clear. One evening, as Maya practiced channeling energy techniques that would have been called magic by her ancestors, Queen Lyralee collapsed. Vorthak caught her gently in his massive claws, but Maya could see the truth in the dragon's ancient eyes. The queen was dying. I cannot maintain the barriers much longer. Lyralee whispered, her voice barely audible. The power that has kept this world safe is fading, and when it fails, the swarm will sense us. They will come here in force, and even Vorthak's power will not be enough to stop them. Maya knelt beside the failing queen, understanding what was being asked of her. The protective barriers around Nethera had been created by the combined life force of millions of Etherians. If they failed, the last bastion of their civilization would be consumed, along with the knowledge needed to fight the swarm. There is another way. Queen Lyralee continued, her eyes fixing on Maya's with desperate intensity. The barriers can be transferred, but only to someone who carries both Etherian knowledge and the genetic markers of the ancients. You are the only being in the galaxy who meets both requirements. Maya felt the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders. If she accepted this responsibility, she would become the guardian of not just human space, but the last remnant of Etherian civilization. She would have to leave her own people behind to maintain the barriers that kept Nethera hidden. But even as she considered the sacrifice, Maya knew she had no choice. The knowledge stored in Vorthak's memory was too valuable to lose, and Queen Lyralee had already given up so much to preserve it. Someone had to take up the burden of protecting what remained, except, Maya said, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she was agreeing to. But I want something in return. When the barriers transfer, I want Vorthak to be free to fight the dragon. Has been bound to this world for too long. It is time he took the war to the enemy queen. Lyralee smiled for the first time in weeks. You would make a good Etherian human. Your people are fortunate to have someone willing to make such sacrifices. The Transfer ritual took place at the heart of the palace where the barrier's energy was strongest. Maya felt the power flowing into her like liquid fire, rewriting her DNA and expanding her consciousness beyond anything she had thought possible. She was no longer human in any meaningful sense, but something new entirely. As the barriers settled into their new configuration around Maya's transformed body, she felt Queen Lyrelai slip away. The alien queen died with a smile on her face, finally able to rest after millennia of guardianship. Her body dissolved into points of light that flowed into Vorthak, adding her essence to the collective already contained within the great dragon. Maya now stood alone as the guardian of Nithara, but she was not truly alone. The voices of millions of Etherians whispered in her mind, offering guidance and support. And Vorthak was free at last to return to the war that had taken everything from him. The great dragon spread his wings for the first time in centuries, and Maya could feel his joy at being able to move freely again. But there was also grim purpose in those ancient eyes. The enemy that had destroyed his people was about to learn what happened when they faced a foe who remembered every technique, every strategy, every sacrifice that had been made. Reports from human space grew more desperate each day. Admiral Sullivan had managed to evacuate the core worlds, but the refugee fleets were scattered and defenseless. The Void Swarm's main force was approaching Earth itself, and conventional weapons remained useless against enemies that existed in multiple dimensions. Maya made her decision. She would have to risk everything in one desperate gambit. Instead of staying on Nithara to guard the barrier, she would transfer them to an automated system and join the battle herself. The knowledge in her head was useless if she could not share. Maya and Vorthak emerged from hyperspace near Earth to find a battle already raging. The human fleet under Admiral Sullivan's command was scattered across the solar system, engaged in desperate fighting against enemies that seemed to be made of living darkness. The Void Swarm's main force had arrived, and conventional weapons were proving as useless as Maya had predicted. Through her enhanced senses, Maya could see the true horror of what was happening. The swarm creatures existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them nearly invulnerable to normal attacks. Human ships fired their weapons only to watch the beams pass harmlessly through targets that flickered in and out of reality. The enemy was not just destroying the fleet, but learning from each encounter. Maya watched with growing alarm as the swarm adapted to human tactics. Their creatures began mimicking human ship designs, using the information to become more effective predators. The process was horrifying in its efficiency. Admiral Sullivan. Maya heard Kate's voice over the communication channel. "Thank God you made it back. We are getting massacred out here. Our weapons are useless, and the enemy seems to anticipate our every move." Maya felt Vorthak's consciousness touch hers as the great dragon assessed the tactical situation. Through their shared awareness, she could see what the human commanders could not. The swarm was not committing its full strength to this battle. They were testing, probing for weaknesses, while keeping their main force in reserve. "This is just the beginning," Maya told Kate. "The enemy is studying your responses, learning how humans fight. The real attack will come once they understand your capabilities completely." "Then what do we do, Kate?" asked desperation clear in her voice. "We have lost 12 ships in the last hour and barely scratched the enemy." Maya looked out at the battle raging around them and made a decision that would change everything. She would have to reveal her transformation to the human fleet and hope they could accept what she had become. The alternative was watching her species be consumed like so many others before them. "All ships, this is Maya Torres," she broadcast on all frequencies. "I am going to demonstrate new weapons and tactics developed from alien technology. Follow my lead and do exactly what I do. Any deviation could result in friendly fire casualties." Maya felt Vorthak's agreement as the dragon began gathering energy from dimensions beyond normal space. The techniques they were about to use had been developed by the Etherians during their desperate war against the swarm. Every method had been paid for in blood and tested in the crucible of defeat. The first target was a swarm creature, the Ao, size of a battleship that existed primarily as a writhing mass of tentacles and teeth. Maya reached out with her transformed consciousness and touched the barriers between dimensions. She could feel Vorthak's power flowing through her as ancient. Etherian techniques activated dragon fire erupted from her hands, but this was not the normal flame any human had seen before. This fire burned in multiple dimensions, simultaneously reaching across space to strike targets that normal weapons could not touch. The swarm creature writhed as the dimensional flames tore at its essence, reducing it to scattered atoms. The human fleet watched in stunned silence as their former captain wielded power that seemed to come from mythology itself. But there was no time for explanations. Maya was already moving to the next target, showing the human ships how to position themselves to avoid the enemies. Interdimensional attacks. Follow the energy patterns she instructed, firing another burst of dragon fire at a cluster of smaller swarm creatures. The enemy cannot manifest fully in our dimension. They exist in the spaces between, but that gives them weaknesses. Position your ships at these coordinates and fire in sequence. Admiral Sullivan was the first to understand what Maya was trying to show them. The human fleet began moving in patterns that seemed random, but were actually designed to force the swarm creatures into positions where they were more vulnerable. Kate ordered her gunners to fire at empty space, but Maya guided their shots through dimensional folds to strike enemies they could not see. The tide of battle began to shift as more human ships learned to use the new tactics. But Maya knew this was only a temporary advantage. The Meowite swarm would adapt quickly, and their main force had not yet committed to the fight. The real test was still coming. Long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system. Maya felt her heart sink as she realized the scale of what was heading toward Earth. The swarm had brought not just a fleet, but an entire world ship, a living planet that served as their mobile base. The world ship was larger than Earth's moon and covered in organic structures that pulsed with malevolent life. Maya could sense millions of swarm creatures crawling across its surface, along with something else that made her transformed consciousness recoil in horror. At the heart of the world ship was the Swarm Queen, the central intelligence that coordinated their entire species. Vorthak made a sound deep in his chest that carried both rage and fear. Even the great dragon had never faced something of this magnitude. The Swarm Queen was older than civilizations and had personally overseen the consumption of hundreds of species. Her power was beyond anything the Etherians had ever encountered. Maya knew that conventional tactics would be useless against such an enemy. The world ship could probably destroy the entire human fleet with a single focused attack, but the memories stored in Vorthak's consciousness suggested another possibility, a desperate gambit that had never been attempted. She would have to make direct contact with the Swarm Queen herself, using her hybrid nature, to establish a connection that might allow negotiation. Maya had both human genetics that made her immune to swarm control and Etherian knowledge that might let her communicate with an intelligence that, vast it, was incredibly dangerous. The Swarm Queen could destroy her mind with a thought, or worse, transform her into another puppet serving the collective will. But it might be the only way to save both Earth and what remained of Etherian civilization. Admiral Sullivan Maya called out over the communication channel, "I am going to attempt something that has never been tried before. If it fails, the Earth fleet will need to implement evacuation protocol immediately." Kate appeared on screen, her face showing the strain of the battle. "What are you planning, Maya?" Looked at her old friend, knowing this might be the last time they spoke. "I am going to make contact with the Swarm Queen directly. Try to establish communication and see if there is any way to end this without the complete destruction of both our species." Kate paled at the implications. "Maya, that thing has consumed entire civilizations. What makes you think you can reason with it?" "Because I am no longer entirely human," Maya replied, feeling the weight of her transformation. "More keenly than ever, I carry the memories of every species the swarm has fought, including knowledge they may not expect me to have." Before Kate could respond, Maya closed the channel and turned her attention to Vorthak. The great dragon understood what she intended, and though every instinct screamed against it, he began preparing for the most dangerous flight of his long existence. They would have to penetrate the world ship's defenses and reach the chamber where the Swarm Queen held court. Maya would then attempt to establish mental contact with an intelligence that had been consuming galaxies since before Earth had cooled. It was madness, but it was also their only hope as they approached the world ship. Maya felt the full weight of the swarm's attention focus on her. The creatures covering the surface writhed and twisted, trying to track something they could not quite understand. She was human, but carried Etherian knowledge. She was alive, but touched by dimensions they could not reach. The defenses opened fire with weapons that bent space itself, creating gravity wells and dimensional rifts that could tear apart normal matter. But Vorthak flew through spaces that existed between reality using techniques learned during the ancient war. The great dragon had survived the fall of his civilization by learning to move where enemies could not follow. They landed in a vast chamber at the heart of the world ship, where organic walls pulsed with alien life. Maya could feel the presence of the Swarm Queen like a weight pressing down on her consciousness. The central intelligence was vast and ancient and utterly alien, yet there was something familiar about it that she could not identify. The Queen manifested as a figure of living darkness, roughly humanoid, but composed of the same writhing tentacles and teeth that characterized all swarm creatures. Maya approached slowly, keeping her movements non-threatening, while Vorthak's presence provided a barrier against psychic attack. "Why do you resist?" The Swarm Queen spoke directly into Maya's mind, her voice carrying the weight of cosmic indifference. "Your species will be consumed as all others have been. Your defiance only prolongs suffering." Maya reached deep into the memories Vorthak had shared, looking for some key to communication with this ancient enemy. In the deepest archives of Etherian knowledge, she found references to something called the First Hunger, and suddenly everything became clear. "You are not the original enemy," Maya said with growing understanding. "You are a refugee just like the Etherians were. Something else drove you from your home, and you have been running ever since, consuming other species to fuel your flight." The Swarm Queen recoiled at Maya's words, revealing emotions Maya had not expected to find. "How could you know of the Devourers? They were destroyed when the first galaxy fell. We are all that escaped their hunger."